Hi, everybody. Today is Wednesday, January 27th. Welcome. Our presenter tonight is Carolyn Scanlon. Chag Sameach, everybody. It's Erev Tu B'Shvat. I hope you make the most of the holiday and at least get out and smell some trees tomorrow. I think everybody knows me. I'm Daryl Cooperstock, and I'll be your tech host tonight. Shoshana Zaks will be your program host. Everybody can hear me? Those who have their heads, but okay. We are going to be recording the session tonight, so please be aware of that. The recording will be available in a couple of days on the BEKI website under the menu Online Learning. It's under the learning. It's under the learning menu. It's the last choice, which is, it says online schmoozes or online recording, something like that. For everyone's sake, as usual, we're going to ask that during the presentation, everybody stay muted. And if you have a question of Carolyn, if you can write the word question and just the word comment to me. I will make a list of people and we'll take comments and questions in order. For the most part, we're going to have Carolyn's presentation. She will be sharing her screen tonight. And so most of the question and answers will be later. If there's something that's particularly important to interrupt for, we'll certainly try to do that in context. Anybody have any questions about technology or anything else? Okay, so I expect everybody to mute themselves now. And I'm going to turn it over to Shoshana.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you. I am very excited about our Tu B'Shvat Schmooze. Cara Scanlon is an urban forester and a certified arborist, so she knows a lot about trees. She has a degree from what used to be called the Yale School of Forestry, which I just found out tonight is now called the Yale School of the Environment. Is that correct? Yeah.
That's right. Yes.
And she'll be talking to us tonight about the work she does with Urban Resource Initiative to help maintain green space in New Haven, Connecticut. And I will now turn over the talk to Caro.
Awesome. Thank you, Shoshana and Daryl. I'm gonna share my screen. Hopefully this part goes well. Okay. Can everyone see that? Great.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, so I have about 30 minutes, I think, of presentation, and then I'm imagining, hopefully a healthy amount of time for Q&A at the end. But as Daryl and Shoshana said, if you have a burning question, certainly I welcome your interruptions. And so, yeah, I will just launch in. Yeah, Chag Sameach, happy Tu B'Shvat. I am Caroline, or Caro for short. This is the conversation arc that I'm imagining for our schmooze this evening. I'll start with just sharing a little bit about me, and then overview Urban Resources Initiative, or URI for short, and just share a bit about the organization itself for those of you who don't know. I then have some tidbits about New Haven's urban forest, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our public tree planting program, some highlights from 2020, and then share some ways to engage with our work here in New Haven. So first, a little bit about me. That is me in the bottom left-hand side. I think we're somewhere in Amity, and that is a red maple that our team has just planted. Yes, but I am an urban forester and a certified arborist, and I am the green skills manager at Urban Resources Initiative. So that's our tree planting and green jobs program. I live in New Haven, but I'm originally from Northern California, the San Francisco Bay Area, and I came here to go to graduate school, and now it's been 4 or 5 years. My favorite trees are the California Coast Live Oak, which is an excellent climbing tree, the redwood, very iconic of the forests of that region, and then from native to around here, the Eastern White Oak, which is just an epic and beautiful tree. So my bi-coastal oak tree loves. I am a former school teacher and school garden coordinator. I did participate in a fellowship at Urban Adama, which is connected to the Adama Fellowship at Isabella Friedman. And I know that you spoke to the folks at Hazone last week. So there's like a little bit of that lineage in my background and training. So I'm always looking for ways to practice earth-based Judaism. So it's just a little bit personal. But now I can, just share a bit more about Urban Resources Initiative. So as I was sharing before, some of you popped on to the screen, we are a university nonprofit partnership based at the Yale School of the Environment and serving New Haven. So all of our work is based here in the city of New Haven. And our mission is to foster community-based land stewardship, to promote environmental education, to advance the practice of urban forestry. So, to do a lot of external sharing of our work outside of New Haven as well, and to provide Yale students with clinical learning opportunities. So the community-based land stewardship, what we mean by that, our organization was founded by a social scientist who social forestry and community forestry was his specialty. And he did work primarily in the Himalayas and rural areas overseas and brought that methodology, that practice of working with local communities to plan and steward and benefit from the resources, the forest resources that belong to them. And so we take that framework of really being engaged with the community and environmental decision-making and stewardship to New Haven. And so that's a little bit of the lineage of our organization. And we've been around for doing work in New Haven for over 25 years. So, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about New Haven being the Elm City, named after an iconic tree. The American elm was once planted prolifically throughout this city. And this photo from Temple Street was taken in 1880. One of my former classmates found a street tree census, a street tree count from 1916 that found that there were 24,679 street trees recorded anyways, and almost a third of them were American elm trees. And in the early 1900s, there was this a pathogen that came through North America, Dutch elm disease, which really decimated so many of the American elms, especially in cities. They're a beautiful street tree. As you can see, they really feel like a cathedral when they're planted on either side of the street, like an alley. But now you don't really see this scene so much anymore. But there are still over 500 American elm trees in New Haven. But it makes up a much smaller percentage of the overall street tree canopy. But I do want to share that, little bit of history about the Elm City and what we're named for. But many of the elm trees that you do see downtown, on the green and on Yale's campus, they're on life support. They get injections once a year or once every other year to help them fight the pathogen, but they keeps them beautiful and thriving. All right, let's see. Okay. But if you wanted to learn more about the street tree forest in New Haven as it stands now, you can actually go to our website and we have a dynamic street tree inventory map. So you can go to the maps tab and go to street tree. I think it's New Haven street trees. And you'll see the map on the left side of the screen here. And if you zoom in, each of those points actually corresponds to a single street tree. that has been identified and its diameter measured. And it's got the correct, mostly geolocation. And this map is really neat. You can search by species or genus or size of tree. And so there are lots of queries that you can do with this cool street tree inventory map. And the map that you see on the right side of your screen is another way of thinking about our urban forest, or representing information about our urban forest. So it's actually describing the overall tree canopy cover. So not just street trees, but all trees, what percentage of the ground area is covered with canopy, and broken down by neighborhood. And what you see is that the overall tree canopy cover is not distributed evenly across New Haven, that in sort of the urban core of our city and neighborhoods that are more densely populated, also, typically corresponding with neighborhoods that experience redlining, that are, higher percentage of Black and Brown communities, we see less tree cover, which is significant when we think about, well, for a lot of reasons, but also we know that trees provide a lot of benefits, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And so URI, certainly one of our goals is to promote an equitable distribution of tree cover. And we do that by prioritizing street tree plantings in neighborhoods where there's lower canopy cover to begin with. And this is also a map that you can find on our website in the map section. And it's based off of satellite data from 2016. And here's that, description of some of the values of street trees. I think that there is somebody's not on mute, so I'm just gonna ask if someone can mute themselves. Thank you. So that street tree data, we actually used this model developed by the US Forest Service, model called iTree, to calculate benefits that the street tree forest provides to us, the city of New Haven, a model developed by environmental economists. Of course, like, this model doesn't capture all of the values of trees, but it does, start to make a case for why, how trees do work for us and why they are a worthwhile investment of our community's resources. So this model, where we threw in our street tree data from 2000 last year, we estimate that the replacement cost of all of the street trees that are standing in New Haven in the public right-of-way right now would be $68.6 million, which is quite significant, and that they're storing about $3.54 million worth of carbon. But they're also sequestering carbon every year. They're contributing to capturing stormwater runoff, so relieving some of the burden from our combined stormwater and sewer systems. They're removing pollution from the air. And also, the model didn't quite capture this, the avoided energy costs of cooling your home in the summer when you have shade. That's pretty significant energy savings and costs. And then there are all of these uncounted values that are hard to quantify, but I think we know contribute a lot to the value that we have for trees. So sense of place and culture and social connection and cohesiveness. If you're planting trees with your neighbors, that's a benefit that you receive that's hard to quantify. Mental, spiritual, physical health, there's lots of research out there to back this up as well. In our city, we're also employing local folks in the planting of trees, contributing to community development, contributing to wildlife habitat and connectivity between other larger green space patches. So our trees are working hard for us, even our street trees. So that's my main point from this slide. And then to give you a sense of the diversity of street trees in New Haven's forest, this pie graph, which isn't awesome, but I'll just read it out for you. This captures the species distribution of trees from, most recently last spring. So over half of the street trees in New Haven are made up of just 10 different species. So if you are looking to have familiarity with the majority of the trees that you pass by in New Haven on your walks, I recommend getting to know the Norway maple, the pin oak, the London plane, the northern red oak, the honey locust, red maple, little leaf linden, Japanese zelkova, sugar maple, and Callery pear. And then over 50% of the time, you'll know which tree you're walking by, which is a good feeling to have friends all around town. But when we're planting street trees in New Haven, we're actually wanting to really diversify that street tree forest, because a diverse forest is more resilient to all kinds of pressures, from climate change to pests and pathogens. And so it's really important that we actually plant a diverse palette. So last year we planted 570 trees made up of 56 unique species. So we strive to plant no more than 5% of any one species. And so our young tree forest is actually a lot more diverse than the more mature trees. So last year, the Amermachia is the tree that we planted the most of. Beautiful tree with probably maybe unfamiliar to most of you, but it's super hardy and tough and grows well in all kinds of places. The hawthorn tree is what's planted in front of my house, one of my favorite trees, and it's got persistent red berries. It's in the rose family, and birds love that tree. Anyways, I won't go through the whole list, but we plant a lot of different trees. And this is just a Google Street View of Clark Street, just to show you that, the young tree forest is pretty diverse and, makes up a mixed species forest. So now it's a nice segue into talking about our public tree planting programs and how we get these trees planted, who they're planted by. So as I mentioned, URI is a university nonprofit partnership between Yale School of the Environment and New Haven URI nonprofit. But then we have a public-private partnership with the city of New Haven, where the city invests money every year for public tree planting, and we implement those programs. So we've been planting trees with volunteers. I heard Marjorie say that Marjorie has planted trees with URI as a volunteer along Fountain Street, and many other volunteers have planted street trees through Community Green Space since 1995. And then we started our Green Jobs program, which we call Green Skills, in 2007. And so that model is request-based. Anyone who's a renter or an owner or a business owner or a house of worship and has frontage along the public right-of-way can request a tree to be planted. We plant it for free, and then the tree adopter commits to watering the tree for the first 3 years during its establishment period. And so that's how that works. Our planting crews are fantastic. We, myself and my colleague, Will Tisdale, who's the person with his arms raised up here, we're the two full-time Green Skills staff people at URI. We work with a whole crew of Yale interns, and then they help us supervise youth crews on Saturdays. Sadly, in 2020, we haven't had our youth crews running, but we know that we'll be working with them again soon. But we have been working with our awesome crew from Emerge. And Emerge is a local nonprofit and social enterprise working with formerly incarcerated folks who are re-entering. And they provide job placement and job training skills and other wraparound services, and an incredible family also. So Emerge has been a partner of ours for 10 years. And so our success is certainly wrapped up in their success and the good work that they do. All right. But then, of course, we couldn't plant our trees if we didn't have committed tree stewards, people who are willing to adopt the trees and care for them. And so, yeah, like I said, we have residents from all over the city, businesses, community institutions like churches and synagogues and museums who adopt the trees. And you know, one thing that Colleen, my boss, the director, always says is that the trees are really just a vehicle. I mean, they have all of these inherent values in and of themselves, and we've talked about some of those already, but they're really also a vehicle for us to form connections with people and institutions, communities across the city, to invest in our neighborhoods, to provide good employment, to build trust between people who may not otherwise encounter one another in their daily life in New Haven. And then the trees can actually be opportunities to heal from something that people are mourning, or to celebrate a life cycle event as well. So I'll talk a little bit more about tribute trees that we plant. But certainly, yeah, the trees are a vehicle for so many other important things. So some of the tribute trees that we have planted in the past years, you know, I'll talk about this one campaign, the graduation trees, which really started this past spring. We had an intern, Adrian. They were a senior at, oh gosh, it was a New Haven Public High School, Metro Business Academy. And when the pandemic hit and they knew that they weren't going to be having, you know, the graduation that they imagined, they dreamed up this this campaign to promote graduation trees for schools and students who, you know, wanted a way to celebrate and to honor that sort of that major moment in their lives. And so we've planted graduation trees at public schools across New Haven, and also in front of people's homes who have New Haven graduates to honor. We also have had a partnership with the Yale New Haven Hospital and the Birth Registry to plant a tree for every child born in New Haven, which has been such a fun program, and to meet new parents and to plant trees in honor of their newborns. And you know, also we plant trees to honor people who've passed. And we've planted many memorial trees in parks in front of people's homes. One tree that I do want to highlight is the Tree of Life that was planted at the Botanical Garden of Healing, dedicated to victims of gun violence, the Lost Generation Memorial Garden. And there's a group of mothers who have this incredible vision and project that has been coming to life on Valley Street. Maybe some of you have been by it or read about it. And URI has been partners with them in bringing this project to reality. And this beautiful European beech tree, fernleaf beech tree, is one of the cornerstones of the new park that's going in to honor New Haveners who've been lost to gun violence. And so this is just a beautiful, very significant memorial tree that was planted in New Haven this past year. Another project or collaboration that I wanted to share was in collaboration with Kwejo Adai, who is an amazing local artist, muralist here in New Haven. And this is his Sparrow Squadron mural at Dixwell and Division. And Kwejo had adopted a tree from us to be planted across the street from his State Street art studio last spring. And I saw him again at a Black Lives Matter mural painting on Bassett Street in September. And he told me, I have this new mural that I'm painting. I'm almost done. I want to incorporate tree planting there. And I love this I think it's an Instagram post where he writes, he's partnering with URI to have new trees planted in front of the mural, expanding New Haven's urban forest with cleaner air, more habitat for urban wildlife to make public art that actively fights climate change. And I share this example because I think it's significant to look for partners where we might not necessarily imagine them, and that, this work of being environmental stewards and doing what it takes to fight climate change, invest in our communities. It's intersectional, and these connections and collaborations are what really bring, meaning to the work of tree planting. So this is Kwejo speaking to our team as we're planting. This is a hackberry tree. There were 2 serviceberry trees planted there and a dogwood tree planted across the street. All native trees, good for wildlife, with berries for the birds. And then one of the coolest parts of this story was we put a free tree sign or request a free tree lawn sign next to one of these trees after the planting date. And I got a phone call from this person a few days later, whose name was Charlene, and she said, I saw the free tree sign right next to the bus stop. I live just up the block on Dixville Avenue. My son is having a birthday party. He's turning 9 and he would like to have a tree planted for his birthday. And he wants to pass out tree request cards as a party favor at his birthday. And so that was just an incredible, very heartwarming, like ripple effect of the tree planting here in this part of New Hallville. So I call him our youngest tree ambassador. So that is kind of a nice segue into just talking about a few ways to engage in our work here in New Haven for those of you who might want to get more involved. So one is, you can adopt a tree. If you have space in front of your home or even in front of the synagogue or any other place that could use a tree along the public right-of-way, you can become a tree adopter. And it's very easy to do. You can sign up to request a tree on our website or send us an email or give us a call. And the process is we come out, we take a look, we do a site visit, we talk with you about what the options are for your site, what trees would be suitable, and you get to choose a tree with us. And then we would plant it as soon as the site allows. If you already have a tree, you could become a tree ambassador and promote tree planting in your neighborhood or across your networks if you're looking to expand the tree canopy where you live. You can join your local community green space group. So Marjorie was talking about the traffic circle up on Fountain Street. There's also folks that work at the Mitchell Library just across the street from you all. At Edgewood Park, there's a very dedicated group of volunteers. They work year-round, Friends of Edgewood Park. I love this photo of the people with their hands up. That's the YOW group, the Young Osborne Whittlesey group. And they have been planting trees and tending to green spaces in that little part of Beaver Hills for, gosh, like over a decade. And now they're working in a pocket park on Blake Street, just across the street from the cemetery. So they meet over the summertime and they're an awesome group, really, age diverse and so lovely. And these trees are on Whittlesey Street. You can sponsor a tree planting if you don't have room for a tree, but you still want to support the work. Of course, you can sponsor a tree planting by making a donation. There are loads of ways to advocate for your local forests and green spaces, like so many other nonprofits who are doing, adjacent work to URI in New Haven. Gather New Haven is one that comes to mind. Love Fed. There's so many. And then I love this, Thoreau and Walden writes about making an appointment with a tree, keeping appointments with trees. So just like taking the time, this is one thing that this pandemic, I just find myself doing a lot more noticing, and like walks that I'm going on or runs, and just finding trees to keep appointments with and to notice and to see their changes through time. And we have this guide to New Haven's trees on our website in the publication section. And so for all the trees that you see planted or growing in New Haven, there's an entry and a little bit about them. And we also have hard copies. So I'm sure I could procure a hard copy for anyone who wanted one as well. But it's a good way just to start to get to know trees if you're new to tree ID. And that is really what I have prepared. So thank you everyone for listening, and happy to answer questions and turn more to a schmooze hour.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
Our first question is from Sasha. So Sasha, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yep. So my question to you is regarding fruit trees.
Yeah.
I heard several years ago there was a whole series of articles that I heard on NPR and read in the paper, and seemed sort of to be the rage to use public space to grow food for people who otherwise might not get fresh produce, and do like a double duty between being green space and providing food. And
Yeah.
I scanned the list of all the trees, and I noticed that there's actually no or almost no fruit trees, and there's probably a few berry and nut trees over that nobody knows that they're edible. But I was wondering, is this anything that's coming up? Do you have any ideas about that?
That's such a good question. Thank you, Sasha. I will say one of the sort of sneaky fruit trees on the list is a tree that goes by a few different names, but serviceberry is one of them. And there are a bunch of serviceberries downtown that I always like in June to harvest when they are ripe, and they make really good jam. And we plant those as street trees. But typically cities, especially in the Northeast, don't plant as many fruit trees as street trees, partially because a lot of people don't want to deal with the mess of falling fruit if they're not harvested in time. Some cities even have ordinances against planting fruit trees. And they typically require different kinds of pruning to prune for the benefit of the fruit production, which is generally like a little bit more intensive than many cities are able to provide with their tree crews. However, I think that for a more neighborhood level response, with committed stewards, from people who live there, it's the perfect place to plant fruit trees. I think that, so far we have partnered with New Haven Gather, which was New Haven Farms and New Haven Land Trust that joined in the past few years, but they have some community garden spaces where they've planted fruit trees. I would love to see more fruit trees planted around, in some cities on the West Coast, like I'm in Berkeley, California. You can walk down the street and pick lemon trees and oranges, from trees hanging out over into the sidewalk. And it's very magical. And I haven't experienced that so much here. It's not a direct answer to your question, but I think that there is a real opportunity, especially at the community scale. So.
Yeah, I know that in Edgewood Park, they planted a few actual fruit trees. I think next to the skateboarding place, there are a few fruit trees, and I think also by the Oasis by Chapel Street, I think.
And I know that I don't remember the name of it, but many cities have like gleaning projects where there are either public fruit trees or people's private fruit trees that they just don't get around to harvesting the fruits, where they can basically put their fruit tree into a little database, and folks who are, ready
that's
to
cool.
glean the fruits will come and make sure nothing goes to waste and to distribute the fruit. So I don't remember what it's called here in New Haven, but I think there is one here. So
Thank you.
yeah.
You're on mute, Daryl.
Thank you. Actually, I was the next person who was on the list, so I'm going to just quickly plant a question that maybe you can address later, and we'll get on with other people.
Okay.
And that is, are there ways for organizations to work in partnership with URI to, through their environmental or their social justice programming, work to help green spaces in New Haven that maybe are suffering from a lack of that? And that maybe later on we can talk about how we as a community, if that's something we want to talk further about, can do.
Yeah.
But, okay, in the meantime, I am going to call on Cynthia. So Cynthia, if you could unmute yourself, please.
Okay. Thank you for a very inspiring presentation. You're clearly enamored of trees, which is wonderful. We all should be. I have a URI tree that was planted a few years ago.
Awesome.
Well,
not so awesome? Okay.
The reason it was not so awesome, you give a man with a chainsaw and only a third grade education, and they see a sign that says no parking in little print because someone's moving, instead of no parking, tree removal, and they can't tell the difference. So my tree was removed. So now I have a tree, but that's not, you guys, you were wonderful, because I couldn't get through to the city for people to get them to believe that this had happened. You probably know the story. Anyway, but my real question is the watering, the commitment to water is a really big commitment. I got a rain barrel, and one of our members, who I don't think is online right now, but he may be watching on Facebook, Bruce Oren, wonderfully helped me set it up, and it's just a few feet from the tree. But for many people, and I'm thinking urban area people who are renters with landlords who may not care, this is a really big issue. And I'm wondering if there's a way to tie the tree distribution to the rain barrel setup. Because like, if you have a rain barrel just a few feet away, you can fulfill your commitment to water. I think otherwise, it can be potentially really overwhelming and a deal breaker.
Yeah. So Cynthia, thank you. Do you have anything else to add?
No, that's my suggestion. That's my whole thing. And also thank you to the various people who watered my tree when I had surgery, because that, it was in the heat of the summer. So anyway, I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you for your question and your suggestion and your story, and for adopting a tree. Yeah, I think that the commitment to water is significant, like you said. And we do run up against people who are interested in a tree, even who maybe would really be committed to watering a tree, but an outdoor water source is not an option. With that said, we have folks who carry water from inside their home. They fill up jugs in the bathroom, and we've seen crazy stuff. People carrying buckets across the street. It's very inspiring. As you mentioned, it's a big commitment. So to see that kind of commitment from someone who really wants to see, the tree planted is inspiring. However, I think that reducing that burden on people is really important. we have done some connecting folks with whether it's younger people or neighbors who have an outdoor water spigot or who are like able-bodied to be able to lug buckets. That kind of social cohesiveness that can be formed in that sort of surprising relationship is kind of neat. But I love the rain barrel idea. I've also thought about like water tanks on bicycles or, a grant system really that could support watering in the summer to increase access to folks who, for whom it's hard, that watering commitment. I
So
see.
the
Yeah.
thing about the rain barrel is that it doesn't tax our water system in
Yeah.
any way. So, I mean, I kind of resented the fact, even though I can manage it financially, the city comes and cuts down a tree by mistake and goes, haha, and now your water bill is going to be really high for the next 3 years. It doesn't take any responsibility. But they had this way that I could get this cheap water barrels. But it seems for people in the inner city areas who are living in rentals with landlords who don't care, or all over the city living with landlords who don't care. The rain barrel, I mean, I would like to see that partnership, not just like be a good idea, but actually happen.
Yes.
So,
We should talk about it. And also I know that there have been some rain barrel giveaway programs, I think maybe with the West River Watershed Coalition, other groups over the years. So yes, I've written it down. So.
thanks.
Okay. Thank you, both of you. Sarah, let's move on to Sarah. I think you had a question.
Yeah, so back to the rain barrel thing. In some cities, they've got these green bags around I've seen them around this town too, green bags around the trees. So you're supposed to be able to put a whole bunch of water, and in some places the city actually comes around, fills up the bags, and then they very slowly go down into the actually water the trees. So I'm assuming that places where I've seen those, it's somebody who's hired their lawn care to take care of it that way. But so the city doesn't use those green bags then?
As my colleague Chris likes to say, sometimes people think that putting the green bag around the tree means that you're good for watering, but you still have to put the hose in the bag and water the tree. It can be just like a little more convenient if you've got a hose system. And like you said, the city can, if they have a truck or if there's a
watering truck,
maintenance company that can come through and the water doesn't sort of splay everywhere and it'll be held in a slow trickle. And it's faster to fill up the bag, but the water seeps out slowly. That it's a great system. I think that the thing that people should remember is that just because the bag is there doesn't mean the tree has received its water. But I like them. You'll see them on Audubon Street. There's a neighbor down there, Arthur Nacht, who has procured water bags for all of the trees. And it's the downtown, the Town Green Special Service District who comes by with their watering trucks and fills up all the bags. And it's a little bit quicker for the watering company, or, if you had your own hose at your own home.
But so then the other comment I was going to say was that, so we've had extra trees planted in front of our house. We have one in front of our house, and then we've taken care of two or at one point it was 2 trees, then it was 3 trees, then it was 4 trees. But because we've got rentals on either side of us, when we commit to because all the ash trees on our street got cut down. So when you commit to the watering them, you can have trees planted in front of your house that aren't directly in front of your house.
Yes, you can adopt trees adjacent to your home, across the street, as long as you're willing to water it. Yeah.
Well, since they're all on this side, it's not quite so hard to haul the buckets or, get the hose out close enough.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you for adopting so many.
Well, the
trees.
kids did half the work, so.
That's a good job for them.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks. Rachel Bashevkin, you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah.
Here you go.
Thanks, Carol, for your presentation. I am the mom, the very proud mom of 2 URI trees. They are 3-year-old Princeton elms.
Oh, awesome.
And seeing my tree prompted another neighbor to get a URI tree. So I know Tu B'Shvat, we're supposed to talk about trees, but I have a bioswale question. Do we
Sure.
get to request those the way we get to request trees, or are those done according to areas that are prone to flooding?
Great question. And you have pretty much answered your own question. We don't cite them on the same request-based system that we do with the trees. The city's engineering department does cite the bioswales, looking at a map of areas that are prone to flooding and are also within these combined stormwater sewer systems where stormwater and sewer are not separated, but actually in an older pipe system where in a heavy rain, the overflow can actually send raw sewage into the river system, which is, pretty gross and upsetting and unhealthy. So that's why it's really important to reduce the stormwater runoff in those particular parts of the city. With that said, if you're excited about the bioswales, and I've had people ask me the same question. Don Henning is the engineer at the engineering department who manages the bioswale program. And so if you're curious, I would look up Don Henning and send her a note. She was also a graduate of the Yale School of the Environment and did some work with URI before now managing that program that we partner with.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a question from Margie. Can you unmute?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hi. So my question is, I had some really pretty trees on my street, and when UI came through, my pretty trees are pretty horrible. So what's the life expectancy of these trees that have been completely gutted?
Yeah.
And are they more at a danger of, rotting out another part?
Well, yeah, first of all, that's so upsetting.
Pretty awful.
Yeah. And we've been experiencing some of that in New Haven where UI has been doing some, cutting of trees, using a certain clause. I'm not going to get into it too much, but if the line is touching the branches of the tree, then there is a clause that allows them to do some emergency cutting. But I know that some cutting that's been happening is not quite following.
So they really don't follow the correct way of I thought it was like you can't do more than a third of the trees dimensions or whatever.
Yeah, so definitely those pruning cuts that are often made around utility lines are usually not like the pruning cuts that are taught, for best practice pruning. And they can leave like stubs of branches that then, die and don't wound over as well, and can invite more infections than a properly done cut would. With that said, I think that your trees probably still have, if they were otherwise healthy trees, a pretty good life expectancy still, as long as they have, not too much of their canopy was taken away. But I'm sure that they're, just like aesthetically not as nice as they once were, which is really upsetting. So that's one area of advocacy, I think, that people can be reaching out to the city and their alder people to let them know that this is happening, to report it when it happens, when you think that it's not when the utility company isn't following the pruning guidelines.
And one more quick question. If there's a little tree and it's older than 5 years and there are these sprouts coming out from the trunk area,
Yeah,
are you all right to cut those off? Because those are like saplings, right?
that's right. If they're coming from the base of the tree,
Right.
we call them like suckers.
Suckers.
Yes, you can just prune those right at the ground level, or call URI over and we can prune it for you. But I give you permission to prune those.
Just want to be validated. I have
Yes.
done it, but I want to be
And
validated.
validate that
Good.
instinct.
Yes.
Yeah.
I go around with my little shears and I just go around and just take care of the trees.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Thanks.
there's certain trees that it will do that more than others as well, like the linden trees, American lindens and little leaf lindens. Even really mature, old, healthy trees will sprout like crazy at the base, and cause some visibility issues. So it's, one thing that a lot of green space groups do is prune those linden trees at the base, for clearance and visibility.
Great, thanks. Rebecca, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you for the presentation and for everything you guys do. I'm one of those Friends of Edgewood Park volunteers, so we really
Awesome.
we're big on you guys. Funny, I had a UI question as well about similar things. I've really become aware I'm a landlord and as well as a homeowner. So UI has been not just pruning aggressively, but also they're coming around with these little tags that say, we need to get better clearance around our power lines. Therefore, we're going to cut XYZ trees. They don't prune, they cut. So I got pretty up in arms about this, called the city tree warden, and learned that there is an option to push back on UI, say, I don't want my tree cut. I only want it trimmed, and I only want it trimmed in the minimum necessary way to clear the power lines. UI does not publicize that option because, it's cheaper for them to just cut. So my question is, from URI or YES or the people you work with in the city, is there a way to force UI to publicize that option, number one? And if not, to just get the word out better to homeowners that we do have the option to say, nope.
Yeah. So Colleen, the director, has been working more closely on this particular issue with UI, and with our city partners with regards to the pruning that URI, the pruning sometimes that URI is doing around the city. So I want to follow up maybe with the group with some more resources or options. I would say that Bill Carone, who works now under the Public Works department, managing the tree division, he would be the person at the city to talk to about this probably. But I'm going to bring this up with Colleen because I know she's been having some conversations with other advocates who are concerned about this very issue, and come back to your community. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Shoshana, you were going to make a comment. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I have a comment. I've been watching with great interest as the little park on Valley Street for the homicide memorial or the victims of violence. And I don't think it's open yet, but it looks like it's getting very close. And it strikes me that it's kind of in Becky's backyard. I mean, there's literally a stairway that leads up to Harrison Street that if you go down, drops you right there. And I'm just wondering if there might be an opportunity for Becky to collaborate with one or more of the groups that are doing this to maintain, or to, certainly when they have an opening event, I think it would be great if we knew about it. It looks like it's going to be a beautiful park. I've now seen it from above and from street level.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that, so the sort of lead visionaries and volunteers at the park who've really poured so much of themselves into this project. Marlene Pratt is one of the primary leaders who I can ask Colleen, our director, to make an introduction. I think that, you know, they have had public volunteer days, and the park will need a lot of stewardship. There are many, many beautiful plantings that have been done, but those plantings require maintenance. And I think that it's a beautiful opportunity for neighbors to come together to support that project and to support the families as well in the process. And so I want to say yes, and it's also not my project to you know, to make the invitation, but I would love to connect you. Yeah, I would love to make that connection. And I think, you know, I have spoken with a few people about like potential opportunities for rituals and ceremonies in that park as well, and for faith communities to be involved in some rituals that might happen, you know, as the park opens. So that's something that I'm thinking about as well. You know, for example, like saying the mourner's Kaddish, or the names of people who've been lost.
Thank you. Corey, I think you're next. You had a question?
Yeah, actually a couple. And Carol, thank you for sharing your expertise with us. I'm curious, which trees suck up the most carbon? And then also, it's always struck me that or raised the question, why aren't there more evergreen trees that are grown as street trees? I'm sure there's a reason for it, but they're nice and they're green all year round.
Okay, the first those are two questions. Any more questions? Okay. Which trees suck up the most carbon? There have been, there are studies out there that I'm not totally familiar with the intricacies, you know, species by species. One thing I will say is that larger shade trees that are allowed to grow to the fullest extent of their lifetime suck up the most carbon. And so when we prioritize planting what we would call shade trees, when there's an opportunity to plant a larger size tree, when there are no overhead wires that will obstruct the space, we prioritize those shade trees, even though they might not be, you know, flowering like cherry blossom trees. They are going to suck up the most carbon. They're going to provide the most shade, suck up the most storm water, you know, take in the most pollution. The bang for your buck in terms of ecosystem services is definitely greater. So trees like oak trees, lindens, red maples, things like this, and many more. So that's my not quite perfect answer to your first question. But, you know, when it comes to thinking about advocating for not only street tree planting, but also preservation of our existing tree canopy, that is one thing that we can definitely do to increase the carbon storage of our urban forest, is to protect existing mature trees. And then your second question, evergreens. Yes, okay, so one thing I've heard about evergreens in New Haven is that we're discouraged from planting them as street trees because when it snows or when it's icy, the sidewalk underneath the canopy, the shade of those evergreen, you know, the evergreen foliage doesn't melt as quickly. This is what I've heard from our partners at the city. I've also heard some cities are more worried about, visibility, or just the fact that they have this form, which maybe is harder to prune for clearance when the trees are younger. All of that said, some cities totally plant evergreen trees in the public right of way. I've seen redwoods planted as street trees in California. My good friend who's an urban forester in DC says they plant eastern red cedar in the public right of way. He says it's a great street tree. We plant, we're starting to plant a little more the bald cypress, and which is not, it's not evergreen, but it is a conifer. Beautiful street tree. So it's a conifer that loses its needles in the fall and winter time. But that's one thing that I'm experimenting with a little bit more.
Thanks. I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
No.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
I want to point out that it's about 5:09, and I have 2 more questions in the queue. So it's the last call for any questions. I think after this, we're not going to take any more. It's been great. I don't want to overtax your time here. Ellen and/or Steve, I don't know who it was, but you had a question.
This time it's me.
Okay.
I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the URI planting team that came to us either 4 or 5 years ago to plant a shade tree at the end of April. And it was during an ice storm. And they came and they dug this hole and it was freezing and there were ice crystals everywhere. And they did such a fabulous job, and they were
awesome.
So generous with their time and their effort in these horrible conditions. And that tree it just looks enormous to us. It's a maple, it's growing beautifully. We used a water bag for 3 growing seasons, and now it's on its own.
That's awesome. Thanks
Thank
for sharing that story.
Just a great experience.
Oh, my colleague Will, who is the supervisor for our weekday team, he has a saying. He says, "Rain, sleet, or snow, the trees got to go." So, yeah, we work in all conditions.
They were amazing.
Great. That's great. We're going to wrap it up with Sarah Berry. You had another, I think, question, comment?
Yeah, no question this time.
Okay.
So I've been here more than 20 years, and I've noticed, and I'm near East Rock, and I've noticed that there's now many more downed, damaged trees, etc. So has something happened over the last 5 or so years that's stressing the trees more? So like when I'm walking through East Rock Park, it's not, and I'm just wondering, because I mean, certainly it happened. We've got, all the ash trees going from the
old ash borer.
Yeah.
Are you asking about an East Rock Park, like in College Woods, or more of the natural forested areas?
Well, the whole area, because I walk all over the park. And most of the trees were gone about 100 years ago. I mean, so most of the trees around East Rock have only grown up in the last 100 years.
Yeah.
And when I think about mature forests and for eastern the US, it should be like 250 years, right? So I wouldn't expect quite so many trees dying, and it's like, at least 10% or have gone in the last, or have been, yeah.
Yeah. Well, certainly in the natural progression of succession, like there's always going to be a certain degree of tree mortality. I wonder if there's certain, I mean, we've had some pretty crazy storms recently. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, where the winds have just been so high that trees act sort of unpredictably when winds get above a certain speed. And, there are certain trees that also grow along some of the edges of for urban forests, like the Norway maples, that just tend to break more easily than some of our native trees. I don't have a perfect answer for your question. Some of the street trees I'm more familiar with that we planted prolifically, like the Norway maple and the Callery pear, we're realizing are really weak wooded. And so they look, many of them look pretty crappy because they actually, you know, they have bad branch attachments and are not as strong as we thought they were, but they were planted, you know, all over our cities. So that's an answer to street trees, but not to the natural areas in East Rock Park.
Yeah, well, but hence the trying not to plant the same tree all over, up and down the same block.
That's right. Diversity is the name of the game.
Thank you, everybody, for your questions and your attention. Shoshana, you want to wrap us up?
Thank you so much, Kara. This was really interesting. As you can see, we have probably unlimited numbers of questions that we could keep you here all night, but we're not going to do that. We may invite you back again sometime, though.
Yes.
It was really, really fun. I want to let everybody know about our book talk next week on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Really exciting. Gabriel Savitt, who used to be a BEKI member, but he had the nerve to move to Illinois. Not sure what that's about. But anyway, I knew that he was a New York Times best-selling author. He has written a new book, and today, as of today, I believe, or this week.
Yes, this morning. It was announced this morning.
National Jewish Book Award. For the book that he's going to talk about called The Way Back, which is it's a young adult fiction fantasy book. I've been listening to it on Audible. It is amazing. I'm not really a big fantasy book person, but this thing is so gripping, and it takes place in a fictional shtetl in Eastern Europe. And there are young people who are, you know, they end up encountering, you know, the angel of death and Lilith and demons and a Hasidic Rebbe. And there's so much going on. It's very Jewish. It's very adventurous. If you know anybody who likes this kind of thing, encourage them to come, because I have the feeling that Gabrielle's going to be really fun to talk to about this book. And especially, I feel especially happy that we got him before, you know, he probably won't be available very much now that he's won this award. So.
Right. And by the way, this is his second National Jewish Book Award. And he's a pretty young man. So he, you know, probably has a wonderful future.
Musical theater. So we're going to have to ask him how he made the leap from musical theater to writing amazing fiction books. So that's one of the questions that you'll have to come next week to find out the answer to. But thank you all for coming, and thank you again, Kara, for a really interesting, engaging presentation. Really appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you
so much for having me. And Daryl too, we'll follow up on the question of how to collaborate. And
it just seems to me like I'm always looking for ways in New Haven for different groups to come together.
Yes.
Especially when there's an actual natural geographic connection.
Yes, the community management team was very instrumental in having the mothers come and talk about doing the presentation. So you can always come to the CMT first Wednesday of every month. If you need the information, just contact me and I'll get you the link.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great.
Okay.
All right.
Well, happy Tu B'Shvat, everybody.
Happy Tu B'Shvat.
And be well, and we'll see you all soon, hopefully. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.